Welcome to our third installment of our spring webinar series presented by Swan Island Networks discussing natural disasters, severe weather, and how situational awareness can better help businesses prepare for these phenomena. Today we will discuss hurricanes and tropical storms and the further challenges and threats posed by these natural disasters during the ever-changing COVID-19 pandemic. We will touch on how climate change and the impending hurricane season overlap and what you can do to protect your assets. If you have any questions during this presentation, please enter them into the chat box on the right and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end. My name is Madison and I'm an intelligence analyst here at Swan Island. Joining me today is my colleague and fellow analyst, Eric. In order to set the foundation for this presentation, we're going to start by defining the types of tropical weather. With what their historical disruptions are in different parts of the world, though the majority of our focus will be on the Atlantic Basin impacts to North America and the Caribbean. After a brief look at the historical storms and damage and costs associated with them, we will transition to the additional costs and threats presented during the COVID-19 pandemic. We will continue with official 2021 predictions for the North American season and how situational awareness technology and disruption mitigation can help you protect your assets during the ever-changing climate. And now with that, I will hand it over to Eric.
Thank you, Madison. Tropical cyclones are defined as a rotating, organized system of clouds and thunderstorms over tropical or subtropical waters. They are broken down into several different categories and severity levels, including tropical depressions, tropical storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes, and typhoons. The Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale is a 1 to 5 rating based on a hurricane's sustained wind speed. This scale estimates potential property damage. Hurricanes reaching Category 3 and higher are considered major hurricanes because of their potential for significant loss of life and damage. Category 1 and 2 storms are still dangerous, however, and require preventative measures. The only difference between tropical storms and hurricanes and typhoons are their geographical locations. In the North Atlantic, Central North Pacific, and Eastern North Pacific, the term hurricane is used. The same type of disturbance in the Northwest Pacific Ocean is referred to as a typhoon. The official hurricane season of 2021 begins on June 1st and will last through November 30th, 2021. Although this season is confined to these months officially, with ongoing climate change, experts have already stressed the need for an earlier official start date to the season to better prepare for these types of natural disasters. Hurricanes and tropical storms are unique weather systems that come with a multitude of impacts, including heavy rains and flooding, damaging winds, storm surge, tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. Although wind speeds and overall strength of the storm can be catastrophic at times, storm surge is another very dangerous aspect of hurricanes, especially at those areas that are at sea level, near the coastline, and near the area of landfall. Storm surge is defined as the abnormal rise in seawater level during a storm, measured by the height of the water above the normal predicted tide. This is primarily caused by winds pushing water onshore. Damage from storm surge on a given location depends on the orientation of the coastline with the storm's track, intensity, size, and speed. Flooding is the most dangerous aspect of a hurricane or tropical storm. This includes flooding in the form of storm surge. After a hurricane or tropical storm makes landfall in a coastal area, it typically heads inland where the storm weakens, but the impacts remain in the form of heavy rains, flooding, severe thunderstorms, and even tornadoes. The deadliest part of all hurricane and tropical storm impacts is flooding. It alone accounts for 10,000 deaths on average worldwide per year. This diagram from the Weather Channel shows the divide in deaths from hurricanes and that nearly 50% of all deaths come from flooding. So why is all of this important? As you can see from these diagrams below, these are the historical hurricane landfalls in the Atlantic Basin from 2016 through last year. There were a total of 30 storms, tropical storms and hurricanes, in the 2020 season. 13 of those were hurricanes and 6 were categorized as major hurricanes. The most severe storm of 2020 was Hurricane Iota, which was a Category 5 storm measuring winds at 160 miles per hour. It made landfall in northeastern Nicaragua on November 17th, towards the end of the 2020 hurricane season. This storm alone caused 61 fatalities and over $1.4 billion in damage. 2020's Atlantic hurricane season will go down in history as a record-breaking year. It is the fifth consecutive above normal hurricane season we've seen, which broke the previous record of 4 abnormal seasons spanning from 1998 to 2001. Out of all of these storms, a shocking 12 storms hit the U.S. coastline, breaking the previous record of 9 in 1916. 5 of these storms landed in Louisiana. 10 storms formed in the month of September, breaking the record for the most storms forming in any month on record. After a storm meets a tropical storm threshold, 39 miles per hour or more wind speeds, the storm is then named from this list below. The name list changes every year, and if the system is given a season in a given season surpass the amount of names provided for the season, they start naming them by the Greek alphabet. Predictions for this upcoming season don't look too far off from what we've experienced for the past 5 years. Active, damaging, and maybe even record-breaking. Dr. Klotzbach from Colorado State University said in a December report that there is a 6 in 10 shot that this year will be another active season. We are in a La Nina year, which typically allows for more favorable atmospheric conditions for developing storms in the Atlantic hurricane season. Models suggest that the Pacific Ocean will gradually warm through this precipitation season into the first half of hurricane season. The National Hurricane Center is even considering moving the official start date of the hurricane season to May 15th because named systems have formed in the Atlantic prior to June 1st start date for the past 6 years. Some models suggest an average season is in store, but what does average really mean? To put that in perspective, from 1981 to 2010, there were an average of 12 named storms, 6 of them being hurricanes and 3 being major hurricanes. But from 1991 to 2021, there was an average of 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. Consensus across the board is that the average season numbers are going up in a short 40-year span. How does all of this relate to climate change? Warmer sea surface temperatures intensify tropical storm wind speeds, delivering more damage when making landfall. The primary cause of rising sea surface temperatures worldwide is climate warming due to excessive amounts of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere. Heat from the warming atmosphere raises the temperature of the sea surface. Warmer sea surface temperatures also cause tropical storms to become 10 to 15% wetter, causing devastating flooding, like we've seen with Hurricane Harvey in 2017, Florence in 2018, and Imelda in 2019. Ocean warming is also fueling extreme rainfall, increasing the threat for flooding driven by hurricanes, which, as I stated earlier, is the deadliest aspect of a hurricane. Ocean warming is occurring due to climate change. Sea level rise is another repercussion of climate change that goes hand in hand with the destructive hurricane season. This amplifies coastal storm surge. Globally, sea levels have risen about 7 inches since the beginning of the 20th century. This heightened level of water is increasing the number of coastal floods during regular high tides and during coastal storms, whether those storms are tropical systems or non-tropical systems such as nor'easters. Areas being affected by hurricanes are shifting poleward. They're shifting northward in the Atlantic, and that can put more property and human lives at risk. The link between climate change and the increase in hurricane frequency is less clear, but very strong when it comes to the size and severity of storms. The data clearly suggests that storms are getting stronger, more costly, and more damaging.
Oftentimes, it is an easy measurement of intensity and severity to look at the costly damage these storms have. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, tracks a variety of severe storms and climate disasters, many portrayed in this image on the screen. From wildfires to hurricanes and tropical storms, the devastation does not end once the storm's eye moves on or the fire is put out. Here you can see in a span of 4 months in 2020, there were $7 billion hurricanes focused on the Gulf and eastern coasts. From the rainfall, winds, and storm surge, which were mentioned earlier in this presentation, these damaging impacts easily affect businesses and force a long-term path to recovery. Taking a look in just the last 5 years, we can see the increase in above average storms reflected economically. For a total of 15 named storms over this period, the total damages were around $393.7 billion. This is the costliest 5-year stretch since 1980, when many of those records started being heavily tracked. Of these 15 storms, 7 of them cost more than $10 billion in damages, and in 2017 alone, there were 3 of the top 5 most costly hurricanes on record. These were Hurricane Harvey, which struck Texas, and Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, which both struck islands in the Caribbean mere weeks apart. In 2020, we saw 7 storms that had over $1 billion in damage and an estimated cost around $41.2 billion total. Those numbers are difficult for us to truly comprehend, so how do we even arrive at these figures? In terms of damage, there are different ways experts measure economic loss. There are those damages that were insured, such as damage to physical structures, loss of property, injury, and anything that can be filed for an insurance claim. The other aspects of this economic loss is the damage that isn't insurable. This could be the loss of income from business closures, the loss of infrastructure, or even a decrease in revenue, creating an inability to pay your deductibles on those insured losses. The economic loss is a large piece of storm recovery, but there are always damages that cannot be insured or recovered, the less tangible, psychological, cultural, and environmental losses, and then of course those who lost their lives. These $15 billion named storms have accounted for over 3,419 deaths. In 2020, Hurricane Laura accounted for 42 of these deaths, which was the highest death toll of the season. These lives lost are irreplaceable. Now let's take a look at a few costly hurricanes. First is Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey was a Category 4 hurricane that made landfall in southeastern Texas on August 25, 2017. After landfall, its movement slowed to only 5 miles per hour and meandered along the shore, lingering in many areas, leading to heavy rainfall and devastating flooding. 46% of rivers in the area reached all-time level highs. It was also reported that there is an 8.4-foot storm surge in Palacios, which was the recorded highest for this hurricane. Parts of Galveston and Harrison County reported over 40 inches of rain in only a few days. In terms of damages, there was 27 to 29 billion reported in insured losses and 134 billion in total economic damage. There were also reported 68 fatalities. The next is Hurricane Michael. Hurricane Michael was a Category 5 hurricane that hit the Florida Panhandle on October 10, 2018. It had 155 mile per hour sustained winds that caused much of the widespread damage. What's unique about Michael is it maintained its hurricane category into Georgia, where winds up to 115 miles per hour were reported. The hardest hit areas along the shore saw 9 to 14 foot increases in storm surge. It's reported that the winds affected 50,000 structures, and this storm caused widespread outages in the Panhandle as well as southern Georgia. As for damages, there were reported 25 billion in insured loss, 6 billion of which was to the Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. There were 45 deaths reported following Hurricane Michael. Finally is Hurricane Laura. Hurricane Laura was a Category 4 hurricane that hit the Gulf of Mexico and Louisiana on August 27, 2020. This was the most powerful Gulf Coast hurricane since Hurricane Katrina. As a tropical storm, Laura hit Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, following which there were more than 1 million people without power, there were widespread landslides, and there were 20 deaths combined between these areas. During Hurricane Laura, state shelters were closed in Louisiana due to the high numbers of COVID-19, so evacuations and shelters were very tough. Hurricane Laura had 150-mile-per-hour winds, and our data shows it had $8 to $10 billion in estimated insured losses and $20 billion in total economic damages. Laura accounted for 77 fatalities. It is important to note that ahead of a hurricane, businesses have vastly different priorities. While looking at preparing for these catastrophes, these are a few steps that could help soften the impacts. First, assess what matters most. The best place to start, look closely at what keeps your business up and running and what factors are relevant in dealing with a hurricane. Chances are it's your people, your assets, and your location. Protect your people, inventory your assets, and fortify your locations. Next, build your emergency plan. Back up your data, set up cloud systems, create checklists, and review contracts. Best of all, a threat monitoring system will help proactively warn you if a hurricane emerges that could impact your employees or facility locations. This means you don't need to worry about missing news of a hurricane that is approaching until time is running short. And since hurricanes will affect some locations more than others, location-based alerts are crucial to helping you focus on the parts of your business that will be impacted most. Walking hand in hand with the damage from these hurricanes, the COVID-19 pandemic has offered up additional complications for post-storm recovery. A FEMA study found that directly after a disaster, 40% of businesses will not reopen. Their findings also illustrate that situation for businesses down the line as well, with 25% of businesses that reopen failing in 1 year and over 90% failing within 2 years after being struck down by a disaster. While these staggering numbers may seem to make business recovery gloom after a storm, there are many lessons learned from the 2020 hurricane season that we can use to further prepare for the 2021 season. With a dispersed workforce in remote business environments, there are a number of factors to consider. It is important for companies to have around-the-clock access to any documents regarding their work, business structure, and necessary contact information. In addition to getting a business up and running again after a hurricane or tropical storm, it's key a company continually accounts for their employees. Whether your workforce is in office or dispersed around the country, employers should have the employees' up-to-date contact information and an awareness of their current location. That could be working at home, a friend's or family's house, or vacationing in a different region, but keeping track of your most valuable assets in the midst of a disaster and during recovery will ensure the company atmosphere remains cohesive. Following a storm, it is always worth checking in on your employees and making sure they are all right, and then being able to talk next steps to help both them and the business. As COVID-19 has had impacts on all of our lives the past year, it has also had large impacts on emergency response to disasters. In a normal case, evacuating to a shelter brings a sense of safety, but with a worldwide pandemic, there are many hesitations and concerns. Many shelters remain open, but with several recommendations in place to combat COVID-19 and create a comfortable and safe environment for those already experiencing uncertainty. Even the comforting and brave staff in shelters have felt the impacts from requirements to wear masks, temperature screening all persons looking for entry into the shelters, and increased cleaning practices. These recommendations align with everyday life, as well as hand washing, social distancing, which may be hard in highly populated shelters. During Hurricane Hannah, which hit southern Texas in 2020, officials acknowledged the impact of COVID-19 and are looking at increasing funding for this hurricane season to use hotels for shelters. Following Hurricane Hannah, there was also an increase in COVID-19 cases by a factor of 3.7 40% of these cases were concentrated in the coastal hurricane states. From 2020, we see there are a few simple steps to help diminish the combined effects of COVID-19 and hurricane impacts. Step 1 is to reestablish a COVID-19 prevention lifestyle once you're in these shelters, which include doing our day-to-day cleaning and distancing as recommended by the CDC. Step 2 is to improve communications that surround evacuations and sheltering to ensure a high regard of safety and consideration of all possible impacts. Step 3 is to continue to learn and apply many of the lessons learned from 2020, specifically accounting for the presence of COVID-19 in our lives and ensuring the spread is minimized as much as possible. With this information, the 2021 hurricane season has the potential to be less severe in regards to COVID-19 with all these lessons learned. And with the additional safeguard of vaccination, as more and more people are immunized against the virus, businesses and employees can hopefully protect themselves in this way in an otherwise time of great uncertainty. Eric will walk through how situational awareness can help mitigate these combined impacts.
Now that we have gone over the impending threats and continued threats due to tropical cyclones, let's talk about how we at Swan Island Networks can support your organization with situational awareness technology. Analyst alerting gives near real-time reporting with vetted sources, images, and location data for a multitude of threats. Dashboards integrate asset and risk data into a common operating picture so you can quickly identify critical threats that may threaten life safety or cause business disruptions. These dashboards display graphics, maps, alerts, and news from government officials, utility companies, meteorologists, news outlets, and social media. We also have 24/7 automated alerts from the National Weather Service, including advisories, watches, and warnings. Receive alerts near employees, property, or other asset location by customizing your asset proximity. Analysts are working daily to track these threats against your business. Analysts track and alert out the information and approach of storms, as well as landfalls, reported damage, injuries and loss of life, utility outages, transportation disruptions on the ground and in the air, and other related impacts, supported with maps, models, images, or video footage, and other resources from other weather offices, officials, news outlets, and social media. Here is an example of a hurricane dashboard from August of last year. As you can see, we have detailed map overlays that monitor the storm's track and watches and warnings of the surrounding area. Some of the sources we track include Environment Canada, the National Weather Service, and its many sub-agencies such as NOAA and the National Hurricane Center when it comes to North America. We also track regional meteorologists and weather offices, FEMA, local and regional emergency management, fire and police, departments of transportation and transit, power utilities, local news sources and journalists, airports, and general social media sources. Altogether, these sources provide a full picture of developing situations and allows for the quickest delivery of relevant information. Along with analyst alerting, we have a number of automated alerts that go out 24/7 to our clients. These include severe thunderstorm watches and warnings, tornado watches and warnings, flash flood watches and warnings, as well as hurricane, tropical storm, and storm surge related watches and warnings, with detailed descriptions and geolocations filtered to any asset proximity, radius, polygon, or route. What does all of this mean for you? We have mapped out what it may look like during the time of an expected tropical storm or hurricane infecting your area. A week and days in advance, the analyst team will alert on the outlook and development of the storm using SPC outlooks, National Hurricane Center, and NWS watches and warnings, and create a dashboard relative to the situation. We send up-to-date alerts on announced evacuations, emergency declarations, and emergency personnel deployments. Less than 48 hours in advance, you will receive news-based weather forecasts, automated NWS watches, and localized impacts such as gas and grocery shortages. Less than 1 hour ahead, you will receive automated NWS warnings and on-the-ground level coverage of the landfall. During and after the storm has impacted your area, you'll receive alerts with news, official, and social media coverage of damage, deaths, injuries, evacuations, emergency declarations, utility outages, and transportation disruptions. On top of the analyst-curated coverage during this timeline, we also have dashboards accessible and updated 24/7, 365 with map overlays, geotagged alerts, storm prediction center outlook graphics, meteorologist discussions, and more.
Looking forward at our spring webinar series, our fourth installment of wildfires and power shutoffs will be in early June. And then in early July, there will be earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes, and winter storms will be coming in late July. You can access each of our webinars on YouTube as we upload them following these events. Thank you for attending our webinar. Now we will answer any questions sent in. It looks like our first question is, the assets I want to protect are in the New York City area. Should I be worried about the incoming hurricane season?
I can answer this one, Madison.
Okay.
Yes, Hurricane Sandy, unofficially known as Superstorm Sandy, made its way up the Atlantic coast in October of 2012, causing storm surge and flooded streets and subways across the city, as well as widespread outages. So yes, there is definitely a need for this protection in the New York City area.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. It looks like our next question is, I don't have any assets in the Gulf Coast or in hurricane landfall prone area. Can TX360 or TX Global still help me? Well, yeah, let me answer this one, Eric. TX360 and TX Global provide a wide variety of situational awareness technology for a number of different threats that could impact your business and operations and assets. Referring back to the $1 billion event map that I had presented, you could see that there are $1 billion disasters in all 50 states, from hurricanes to tornadoes to severe storms and wildfires. It's important to note that just because a hurricane isn't making landfall in your area does not mean that you won't feel the impacts of the flooding or even just the business disruptions and resource disruptions that can come from that as well. Our next question is, what does TX360 bring to the table that my regular choice news doesn't get me?
I can take this one, Madison. So watching the news might suffice for a family preparing to evacuate, but businesses need a stronger set of tools. TX360 tells you what you need to know about these storms, when you need to know it, without overloading you with unnecessary information. Having this cloud-based platform is ideal for you to prepare and protect your assets ahead of natural disasters like these. I think that rounds out our few questions for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in our future webinars, and you can see our past webinars recorded on YouTube.